At Sierra, discover great deals on top brand workout gear, like high-quality bikes, which might lead to another discovery. Getting back in the saddle isn't always comfortable. Good news is Sierra has massage guns. And chafe wipes, too. Discover top brands at unexpectedly low prices. Sierra, let's get moving.
Since you're new to H&R Block, we'll look at your returns from the last 3 years for any money your last guy might have missed, for free.
I could get money back from last year?
You could. We'll find any mistakes.
Could have really used that 2 years ago when I dated that mistake for 5 months.
Don't leave money on the table. Switch to H&R Block and get a free Second Look review. Second Look is included at no additional cost with the purchase of tax preparation. Results vary. All tax situations are different. Fees apply if you have us file an amended return.
Hello, and welcome to Outward, one of the top podcasts to listen to while you're convalescing in bed after a gorgeous, gorgeous little procedure. I'm Jules Gill-Peterson, your host for this episode, and let me say, as a true connoisseur of the finest plastic surgery to be had, there's a lot of lies and omissions out there that they use to make it seem like transsexuality isn't the glory and the achievement that it is. Not only to feel good in your body and put those dysphoric demons to rest, but to be snatched and beautiful to the gods. Under this category of omissions, I would nominate the way the whole phraseology of gender-affirming care, honey, it's a euphemism. It's a tidy little weird phrase that gives you no information, so you don't really have to think about how fabulous it is to take hormones, remove hair, train that voice, and get surged up. And the euphemism is also, I think, a way to avoid talking about how hard it really is to get on that operating table and to get off. And I'm not even talking about all this anti-trans legislation or all those insurance nightmares or even saving up the money to pay the bills for the main event. I'm talking about all the time, preparation, and money it takes to be cleared for surgery in the first place, and especially to recover afterwards. And on today's episode, I'm sitting down to talk with Owen Dempsey, who helps to run Quest House, a post-op lodging and peer support home in the San Francisco Bay Area for trans men recovering from bottom surgeries. Owen and I get into the history of this really interesting nonprofit, how it fills a really specific and important need for trans men recovering from certain surgeries, and also kind of a bigger conversation about what this project has to say about what supporting trans people who are going through medical transition really looks like. No more euphemisms, okay? So stick around, because right after this short break, we'll be talking all things Quest House.
Here's a little tip for all the music fans out there. Discover is accepted at 99% of places that take credit cards nationwide. You heard right, 99%. And every time you make a purchase with your card, you automatically earn cash back, which means you could earn rewards for those almost front row seats, ride shares to the venue, even that concert merch you've had your eye on since it dropped. If all of that sounds like music to your ears, remember, it pays to Discover, based on the February 2024 Nielsen report. Learn more at discover.com/credit card.
What if there were a medicine that could heal almost anything?
That would be great.
But they didn't want you to know about it.
Sorry, who's they?
Some people are following me, and I brought my tortoise.
From executive producers Mike Judge and Greg Daniels and co-creators Joe Bennett and Steve Healy comes an animated comedy thriller about what it takes to change the world. Common Side Effects. New episodes, Sundays at 11:30 p.m. on Adult Swim. Now streaming on Max.
Quest House is a lodging and peer support home in the San Francisco Bay Area specifically created by and for trans men recovering from bottom surgeries. At its core, the nonprofit provides lodging on a sliding scale in a region that both has a very high concentration of top-tier surgeons, but also a legendarily expensive hotel and rental market. But it also has a grassroots commitment to thinking about healing in more than just simple medical terms. Based on a tried and true, I think, transsexual principle, where those who have gone through an experience of surgery and recovery share their expertise and offer care and support to the next generation, Quest House, I think, has a lot to tell us about some of the things that we don't always seem to want to acknowledge about the material needs people have after they get the kinds of surgeries that trans people, we often have to struggle our whole lives to obtain. So I'm really delighted to be joined by Owen Dempsey. Owen is the executive director of Quest House Community Healing. Inspired by his own lived experience as a trans man, Owen has dedicated his personal and professional life to uplifting and supporting his community through the process of pursuing life-saving transition care. So Owen, welcome to Outward. Thank you so much for coming on by to talk about one of my absolute favorite topics on earth, which is surgery.
Thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be here. This is a really incredible opportunity. And I'm also love talking about surgery. So
it's always nice. It's always nice. You know, those who know, which feels maybe like an apt place to start. You know, Quest House was founded originally in 2016. And so, yeah, what kind of led to that original founding? And what were some of those initial goals or hopes for the organization? And also, like, what was the very first Quest House like? Because as I understand it, it has gone through some different, like, literal in terms of the housing space, some different iterations. So yeah, take us back to 2016. How did this all get started?
So Quest House began because of a shared vision between two trans men who had been through their own gender-affirming surgery process. And they wanted to create a space for the joys and the challenges of this vulnerable experience to be witnessed, honored, supported by people that truly see us for who we are. So the primary goal of this resource was to support transmasculine folks during this life-changing rite of passage, and also to show the world the kind of community care that is possible to co-create. The original Quest House started super small in a 2-bedroom apartment in Sausalito, California, with the house host living in the living room and the 2 bedrooms open for the recovery guests. As word spread about the resource, the demand grew, and Quest House eventually moved into a full-sized recovery home in 2019, which was a really special thing to have happen because it hadn't really been done before. And unfortunately, COVID led to the closing of that home. But after a 4-year hiatus, we reopened in June 2024 in a new big recovery home. And, you know, it feels like very much like this calling to steward this community space is a path that chose all of us who are involved in founding it or running it or just volunteering with it. It's really a beautiful opportunity to connect with others and to also demonstrate what's possible when a community rallies together to care for folks at their most vulnerable.
I really love that. And it does testify to something that I know I could certainly empathize with, where it's just like, I don't know, so, you know, when you go through these incredible life-changing, honestly, life-giving transitions, especially getting surgery, and you come through on the other side, there is this feeling, for me, it always manifests as like, oh, wait, should I go to medical school and become a surgeon so I can you just want to give this gift to other people? And, you know, mercifully, I have held back from doing that. I don't think I have the tolerance for blood, but there are so many other ways to show up and to support, particularly in the kind of unique way of peer support, right? But I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about why, trans men and transmasculine people in particular might have specific needs for a place like Quest House. You know, why is that something that's sort of important to think about in terms of like the specificity of trans men's experiences, not just in terms of like surgical experiences, but like cultural experiences, gendered experiences, you know, what sort of like, what are some of those motivations and goals, in coming together, you know, as trans men supporting other trans men?
Yeah. So, you know, when any person or people are going through medical procedures or some like major life-changing experiences, we are wired to seek out others going through the same thing. Where as humans, we're built for connection. We want to be seen and known and cared for. And, you know, there have been studies and trials across healthcare fields that have repeatedly shown the benefits of peer support, to healing, not just for trans individuals, but for anyone navigating a major medical experience. Literature from cardiac and respiratory surgery fields have indicated that this kind of peer support isn't just good for surgery recovery, but also for general quality of life and health outcomes on a larger scale. I really like a quote by author and activist Bell Hooks that says, "Rarely, if ever, are any of us healed in isolation. Healing is an act of communion." And I think we hold that really close to heart at Quest House, because we've seen that some of the best resources and advancements in healing and healthcare come from the lived experiences of the patients who know firsthand what it's like to go through the very procedures that they're supporting others through. And so that's what we're doing at Quest House. All of the people involved are trans and have gone through some form of gender affirming surgeries. So to the question, for transmasculine folks in particular, there's a lack of widespread knowledge and research and resources focused on our gender affirming surgical options and the rest of the life experiences afterwards. These surgeries are extremely stigmatized, and there's a lot of misconceptions and myths and misinformation floating around about them. And changing that really starts within our own community and holding space for folks to learn and to be together as they experience these things. The surgeries that we support folks through, phalloplasty and metoidioplasty, are extraordinarily complex and intensely intimate procedures. So it's vital that folks going through these have an opportunity to be with others on similar journeys. And Quest House is currently the only physical space in the world that is solely dedicated to transmasculine surgery healing. And a lot of the folks who stay here have never met someone else going through this process. And for some of them, they've never met another trans person before stepping foot in Quest House. And so one of the biggest testimonials that we consistently get is that Quest House has opened folks up to community and inspired them often to seek out more of it when they've returned home, which is a really special thing to see. We get to witness folks transforming from lonely in their shell, struggling, right, to confident and connected with their community, which is kind of why we exist, is to normalize this experience, to humanize this experience, and to show transmasculine folks and trans men that you're not alone.
Wow. I find that so, I just think that's so important. And, I can't help but put on my little historian hat that I wear. And, it just strikes me that there's so many specific reasons to do that, right? I think something that people don't always appreciate about, some of the many differences between different kinds of trans people's transitions experiences is that they just are gender inflected, right? So it's obviously trans men or transmasculine people don't have one uniform or unitary experience, but it is often the case that you would expect, just in the aggregate, right? Trans men's experiences with medicine, right? With family support, with care, and with resources to track a lot of other men's, right? And one of the things we know about men in America is that there is a lot of isolation often around, just medical care or illness in general. And that also, there's a long tradition of trans women, mostly due to reasons of poverty and being unable to work and so on, having to kind of band together. And that has, not for all trans women, but for some, created these kinds of community networks, right? Where when someone's going through surgery, all the girls gonna come visit you in the hospital, and they're gonna, they can come check on you after and walk you through oh, you're in week 6. Okay, honey, well, that thing that's happening, that's totally normal. All these things the doctor's never gonna talk to you about, and that you can't really find out that much information, or maybe you've read about it on Reddit, but it's something very different to go through it in your own body. But there's a gendered dimension to that differential, right? For a lot of men, that they may not have had those kinds of formative, right? Coming into the process of medical transition, getting ready for these surgeries, in community. And that, I think that isolation, you're right, it can both be very isolating, but it just goes to show, right? How important it is to actually be thoughtful and intentional, right? And that's, but it also seems practical, right? I think one thing people don't know that much about is just, even when they're thinking about what are the material needs of people who get surgery, people who are, hey, you got your date, right? Maybe you even got some insurance coverage, or you got the money, but you are going into that OR room, right? Like, you don't just get discharged from hospital and then that's the end of it, right? That's sort of the neat, maybe media narrative or assumption people have, but it's like recovery takes time, right? And it's complex. It's amazing, but like it's complicated. It could be really hard. And, there's just like a certain kind of relief in having, honestly, it seems like the real experts of recovery would be other people who have had the surgery. Does that sort of like inform the ethos of like the kind of peer support that Quest House tries to offer to people who are staying there?
Absolutely. I really, appreciate you bringing up the fact that, surgery and the surgical process doesn't end when you get off that operating table.
Right? If only.
Right? That would be so nice.
Yeah.
And, I think while providers are often incredibly supportive, right, their role is to do that surgery and then to see you for your 5-minute checkup once a week for a few weeks. But what about all of the other hours that you are existing in that body for the weeks, the months, the years, the decades to come? And so there, as you mentioned, there's weeks and months of recovery, both physical and mental and emotional. And then it often takes years both for your surgical processes to conclude and to settle down into your new body. And then you have to learn how to integrate and to experience embodiment. And I think that's something that's been really special about Quest House is that we get to have folks who are at different stages of their surgical process, different stages of their life, different stages of their transition, in community and in conversation about, what is it like to be 5, 10, 20 years down the line from these surgeries. It's also really special to see people being like, is this normal? I'm not sure if I'm feeling the right way or if I look the right way. And then people can, be like, I've been there. Here's what happened to me at 3 days, right? Just as you said. So I do think all of that very much informs why we exist, because we are trying to fill that gap in resources from what happens when you leave the hospital.
No, I think it's so important. It really like is a game changer. I feel like it's like, you want that for everyone to have that relief, that expertise, that support. Yeah, I'm curious because it's true. I mean, one of the reasons I was excited to talk with you is that this seems like a pretty unique, setup as a nonprofit, and even just as like an actual physical place for people to stay. And that is sort of important in and of itself. Again, it's interesting. Places like the Bay Area have a high concentration of excellent surgeons and clinics for historical reasons. But obviously, the Bay Area is also one of the most expensive regions in the entire United States. And this is very often the case with trans surgery, right? People often have to travel. They often have to go to where they can get an appointment or where the best and competent, providers are. Those tend to be places where then you're being asked to stay for 6 weeks, for a couple months. One, can you take off work, right? How are you going to pay for your living expenses? Can you just afford literally like a hotel or an Airbnb? So there's just providing like a basic minimal kind of, place to stay, on a sliding scale is already a big intervention. But I'm curious for, the folks who have been involved in this, either, right from the start in 2016 or in the relaunch more recently, are there inspirations that you are drawing from?
I think that Quest House arose from a very real, tangible need that folks in our community were feeling. What we do is, deeply intertwined with historical practices of community care and the healing justice lineages that were established long before we came into the picture. Community care has the roots in Indigenous and Black traditions and has been a vital means of survival for oppressed and marginalized folks for generations. And when we think about how trans folks have made it through over time and how LGBTQ folks have made it through over time, it really is a bias for us means of support. One example that really stands out to me, right, is the AIDS epidemic in the 1980s, when it was really left up to the LGBTQ community to care for ourselves. And gay, queer, trans folks came together to create peer support resources, grassroots organizations, affirming community health clinics. And all of those things became essential lifelines for survival, but also just for dignity and care. One story that really inspires me I heard from some folks that in the early 2000s, there was a group of trans guys here in San Francisco who purchased a hospital bed. They pooled their money, bought a hospital bed, and then they brought it, passed it around from person to person as they had and healed from their surgeries, kind of like a brotherhood of the traveling hospital bed.
Wow.
And, they hosted each other. They picked each other up from appointments.
Yeah.
They helped each other access care. And, that's what we're doing at Quest House. And so I definitely feel like we're very connected to historical trans community care and grassroots survival methods.
Yeah. Oh, that's amazing. I love that story about the hospital bed. Look, no one loves being in the hospital necessarily, but there is something kind of magical about those beds. Like they just work in certain ways that are really helpful for recovery. So that's kind of brilliant. Well, we're going to take a short break, but when we come back, more of my conversation with Owen Dempsey.
This episode is brought to you by Amazon. Sometimes the most painful part of getting sick is the getting better part. Waiting on hold for an appointment, sitting in crowded waiting rooms, standing in line at the pharmacy, that's painful. Amazon One Medical and Amazon Pharmacy remove those painful parts of getting better with things like 24/7 virtual visits and prescriptions delivered to your door. Thanks to Amazon Pharmacy and Amazon One Medical, healthcare just got less painful.
We're so done with New Year, New You. This year, it's more you on Bumble. More of you shamelessly sending playlists, especially that one filled with show tunes. More of you finding Geminis because you know you always like them. More of you dating with intention because you know what you want. And you know what? We love that for you. Someone else will too. Be more you this year and find them on Bumble.
This podcast is sponsored by Talkspace. You know when you're really stressed or not feeling so great about your life or about yourself? Talking to someone who understands can really help. But who is that person? How do you find them? Where do you even start? Talkspace. Talkspace makes it easy to get the support you need. With Talkspace, you can go online, answer a few questions about your preferences, and be matched with a therapist. And because you'll meet your therapist online, you don't have to take time off work or arrange childcare. You'll meet on your schedule, wherever you feel most at ease. If you're depressed, stressed, struggling with a relationship, or if you want some counseling for you and your partner, or just need a little extra one-on-one support, Talkspace is here for you. Plus, Talkspace works with most major insurers, and most insured members have a $0 copay. No insurance? No problem. Now get $80 off of your first month with promo code SPACE80 when you go to Talkspace.com. Match with a licensed therapist today at Talkspace.com. Save $80 with code SPACE80 at Talkspace.com.
And we're back. It was coming through like my historian's Rolodex too, just thinking about this conversation. And yeah, it's interesting. I can't think I've come across very many precedents to the kind of support that Quest House is offering. The only thing I could think of was, all the way back in the 70s, Mario Martino, who wrote and published one of the first autobiographies of a trans man. He's a real OG, transsexual man from back in the day. And around the same time, he had actually had a career as a nurse, right? So he was sort of involved in medicine in a number of directions. And him and his wife opened first it was just a support group, as in suburban New York. But I think at times they did sort of rent out rooms as well and sort of provide a place for people to recover after getting surgery locally in the area, since the New York City suburbs had a couple of surgeons who were doing a lot of top surgery and phalloplasty at the time. It's an interesting lineage, and it just seems like a need that gets brushed aside. But I was wondering, speaking of challenges, one of the stories about 2020 that I don't see enough attention coming back to is how deeply people's surgeries were affected, canceled, postponed, delegitimized, deprioritized. And it really did have kind of a pretty devastating effect for a pretty long time in different places. And so, I was wondering, could you share the view from Quest House, what ended up being the impacts of COVID, and why did that sort of lead to the initiative kind of having to pull back for a couple of years?
COVID impacted so many people, so many communities in so many different ways. And I think that the pandemic really it led to the untimely closure of the original Quest House, the same way that it led to the untimely closure of so many small businesses and other nonprofits. But to your point about trans folks and their surgeries during COVID, I agree that is something that's very under discussed. Is not only were surgeries postponed or canceled entirely, but I think there is a lot of when it was ever mentioned, it was like, these are elective procedures.
Yeah.
And that makes it sound like these are just like unnecessary things that we choose to do for fun cosmetic reasons. And that's not the case. An elective procedure literally just means a procedure that has been planned in advance. And so many other medical issues, as long as they're not emergency surgeries, are considered elective procedures. But I think that language was really brought to light in COVID. And that's been kind of hard to get away from because it's been tough to show like, actually, these are legitimate, life-saving, life-changing, and much needed medical procedures. For folks who had their surgeries postponed or canceled or, left in limbo for many months, not only do they have to scramble to change their plans and find new resources and figure out, well, I paid all of this money for this Airbnb and now what do I do? But also just having to process and cope with the mental and emotional impacts of having this desperately needed medical intervention put on hold. I think that led to a lot of isolation and a lot of loneliness, and people in need of resources that didn't quite exist yet. So while I think a lot of people were struggling deeply with this, it also did push the need for these resources forward. And I think that inspired folks to take action, to start online support groups, to just try and support each other the best way possible. I think COVID really highlighted the need for a space like Quest House because when it didn't exist, we saw all these people coming for surgeries or trying to plan for surgeries, but not knowing where they would stay, what's going to be affordable, what's going to be accessible, what's going to be safe. So, we're grateful to be at a point now where we've been able to restart and relaunch post-COVID, but it definitely was a challenge both for Quest House and for the community at large.
So can you talk a little bit about after this difficult period caused by the pandemic, how has Quest House kind of relaunched and what was the impetus for that? And how has it been going so far?
There has been such a change in the landscape of what are the barriers to accessing care and all these things. And there's also been, in some cases, more access to this care, these surgeries than has ever happened before. And so what I was seeing and other folks in the community were seeing was that the number of folks needing these surgeries and the number of people coming to San Francisco for these surgeries was just steadily increasing. We see people right now having consults for their surgeries booked out into 2030. So, it's wild and the need is ever exponentially growing. And I think that was really brought to light as we returned to healthcare settings post-COVID. And so I moved into the Bay Area in 2019 to pursue my own surgical process. And I lived alone and I didn't know anyone in the area. And so I had intended to stay at Quest House. But then my date arrived and Quest House had closed and COVID was here. So I never got that chance to. And I was fortunate that one of my best friends was willing and able to drive across the country to be with me for my first stage of surgery.
Wow.
Yeah, it was really sweet. But, over the next few years, I navigated several more very intense surgeries, very often alone. And then I really personally felt that gap that was left post-COVID in our community. And so as I was recovering from a surgery, it started with the idea of moving in with roommates who were also going through this process. And, that didn't quite come to fruition, but that didn't stop me from dreaming about it. But that's kind of what it felt like for a while, was that it was this dream that I don't know is possible. But, over the next few years, I definitely felt myself called more and more to creating a space for my community because I didn't want other folks to have to go through what I was going through, which was just isolation and loneliness and really struggling with really tough things by myself. And in August 2023, my former roommate moved out of the small 2-bedroom apartment that we shared. So kind of parallel to how Quest House began, we again started in a small 2-bedroom apartment, began hosting folks very casually, one at a time, kind of, underground grassroots style. And as soon as those first guests came, I knew that this was really meant to be something bigger, and that we needed a full house. We needed a resource that was solid and steady and sustainable. But, I just wasn't quite sure how we were going to make that happen. And so there felt like there were endless roadblocks, but ultimately, through a lot of brainstorming and talking to anyone who would listen about it, a tangible plan started coming into place. And in March 2024, I was given the blessing to kind of pick up the Quest House torch and continue the mission that had been started in 2016. And then the ball really started rolling from there. I put out some calls online for help, like, hey, this is coming back. We need people to make it happen, and got a really beautiful outpouring of support and lots of encouragement. And we put together a team of volunteers who were across the country, all trans folks who were either in this process or had completed their process. And we began, plotting and scheming to bring this back to life. And I think that it was through a lot of community support, also through a lot of trial and error and asks for help and putting ourselves out there and being rejected several times, but we were able to, find a supportive property owner. We moved into a new 5-bedroom healing home on June 1st. We actually had a guest move with us in the U-Haul.
Wow.
Because he needed an emergency place to stay. And I was like, join us on our move. Let's go.
Yeah.
And so it's really been a really special experience, and also just a whirlwind. Since June, we've hit the ground running. We had our first fully sold out, house was full week in July of 2024, which it's kind of wild to think back that it's been 7 months since we've been doing this full time. And it's just continuing to grow into, a community staple, both for folks recovering from surgery, but also for community connection and events. We've hosted a retreat. We host, backyard barbecues that we invite wider community to. So it's been a really beautiful thing to see this go from kind of despair to idea to a community effort that is starting to flourish. And, it's something we intend to keep around for a long time so that it can serve, generations to come.
Absolutely. Yeah. What are Quest House hopes, dreams, aspirations?
That's a great question. I think primarily our first order of business is making sure that this Quest House, this space, is concrete and sustainable. So that means that we're not going to go anywhere.
Yeah.
We want to make sure that the folks in our community, transmasculine folks pursuing these gender affirming surgeries, will always have a Quest House here serving them. And so that looks like, seeking supporters and sponsors to make sure that this can stay sustainable. And then we also want to expand. We want to extend our reach both to wider community, so to trans femme folks, but also to folks in different states. San Francisco is not the only place that these surgeries are happening. Yes, we happen to have 8 teams performing transmasculine bottom surgery here. So it is one of the most condensed spots, but there are other places in the country where there's a need for something like this. And so, our dream is that we'll have a national network of trans surgery recovery homes that are run by trans folks for trans folks. Because there are some places that exist that are often connected with hospitals for people to stay after their surgery, but they're a very different vibe. It's often more of a medical healthcare setting, whereas Quest House it's really sweet. It's kind of like an intergenerational family home that you can be with other folks and just heal both physically and emotionally. And so I think our vision is to keep the ball rolling and to not stop here, because there's a huge need out there for trans folks, and we want to work towards a world where nobody has to recover from these surgeries alone.
I love that. Maybe the last question I wanted to ask you kind of goes even bigger, but I got a lot of criticisms about a lot of things, and I guess I feel like a lot of the language and framing, obviously, around medical transition that has been developed has not been developed for trans people. It has developed to make everybody else feel really comfortable, and a lot of it's very euphemistic, right? I don't really like the phrase gender affirming care. It's a euphemism. Like, what is it, honey? What are we talking about?
Totally agree with you.
Yeah, and I'm like, look, surgery is amazing. And let's be real, like trans people, the way we get and experience surgery is actually kind of different than other people. Like it's really wonderful. It's really powerful. It gives you life, right? It's not, people just normally associate surgery with, oh, something's wrong, you're sick, and it's a sad event and it's painful and it's, hard, right? And like, no, it's different. We should be able to talk about that. And so on the one hand, it really frustrates me. I think one of the things that gender affirming care does as a euphemism, one, it lets people not think about surgery, period, because they don't want to think about it. But even when people do talk about surgery, it deletes everything outside of the operating room or the hospital stay. And so people don't know, for example, how many thousands of dollars it might take in like hair removal for you to be able to get into the OR. Having spent all of this time, working in this wonderful home and initiative, what are some of the things that you wish people knew that don't really get talked about? The actual resources, like, never mind how to be an ally, like what do people need? I don't think people always realize, even if you're getting the surgery, that doesn't mean all your needs are being met. So what are some of those things that you feel like are worth sharing just sort of with a broader public audience?
Yeah, I think so many aspects of the conversation around these surgeries and around trans people's existence really is euphemistic and caters to a cis audience or caters to a provider viewpoint. So, even I'm here on this podcast saying gender affirming surgery when that's really saying that language isn't for me. That language isn't for you.
Yeah.
That language is like, oh, okay, like we have to make sure that we're palatable and that it seems like, happy and all of these things. And, I think that it is so tough to strike that balance between talking about these surgeries and these processes the way that they are in reality for us, and then wanting to not be too much or wanting to not give the media or the anti-trans folks more leverage against us. And I think, when we think about what society at large thinks of these surgeries, it's kind of scary and kind of sad to think that like this is what people are thinking, we're doing these things on a whim, and people are thinking that like we're going in and having never thought about it and the doctors are doing it to us. And I think what I really want people to know that these are things that we go through for multiple years. It's an immense amount of physical, emotional, mental challenge, financial challenge, finding peer support or familial support. Those are all huge barriers. If you're getting a surgery that requires hair removal, that often is, could be hundreds of hours of getting very painful electrolysis. Like it's not a fun experience.
Yeah.
And if you get healthcare coverage for that or for this procedure, even so, you're spending thousands of dollars on supplies, both for the procedure itself, but then also like how to keep yourself occupied for 6 weeks or more stuck in bed. And I wish that more people understood that the folks who are having these surgeries have thought about it long and hard, and we are humans having a human experience. We're not just statistics, we're not just subjects. And this is for both the general public and for providers. I think it's really important that these experiences be humanized, as these are really intimate, vulnerable things that we are doing to live in alignment with our truth. These are not things that we're just doing because that would be so fun to go get surgery. It's, often life or death for many people, and myself included. If these surgeries that help us live in our bodies the way that we need to live in our bodies didn't exist, we wouldn't be here. And, there's so much like anti-trans rhetoric that focuses on regret rates that are really made up, because those rates are so negligible compared to the number of the lives that are saved and changed for the better by these procedures. And, I just wish that there was more understanding of the humanity tied into this surgical process. And like we said earlier, it doesn't end when you leave the operating table. It doesn't end when you leave the hospital. We're having these surgeries so that we can live the rest of our lives. So we offer resources and webinars for both folks interested in pursuing these surgeries, but also supporters, providers, people who are just curious to learn more about it, to get more educated so that both, they can make informed decisions about their own care, but also so they know how to talk about it with their friends, partners, patients. And there's also just a lot of resources out there, like for cis people and for providers to find out a little bit more about, what is it like to be a trans person, beyond just what is happening when you have the surgery. And so I wish that more folks would take that opportunity to, seek out learning about us as human beings.
Well, I really appreciate your candor, Owen. I couldn't agree more. As someone who, I'm a little old school. I do like to say the process is sex change, and it's like, for me, it's a matter of life or death. Like, this is the thing that allows me to live. And I also, would say with no hyperbole, the thing I'm the most proudest of in life is being able to get these surgeries. And, I don't necessarily need people to totally understand what that means, but would love people to respect that, because there is a power that you get when you go through all of this that, it probably scares a lot of people, but it's okay to be curious about that. It's exciting. It's something to celebrate. And it's something that needs a lot of resources and support and care. So I definitely encourage listeners, check out Quest House. They have an online presence. They're out on Instagram. There's ways to find more, but there's a lot out there. And, gosh, I could talk to you all day about this, but just wanted to say thank you so much, Owen, for coming on to tell us about this really remarkable and unique initiative, and one that, I can't wait to see more Quest Houses popping up all over this country.
Thank you so much for having me, for opening this conversation, and for seeing what we're doing and the benefits for the community and for society at large. I definitely hope to see more Quest Houses popping up all over, and I really am grateful for this opportunity to share what we're doing with folks. So thank you for having me, and thank you to everyone who's listening.
Well, there's so much more we could talk about, but that's all the time for the main show today. However, there's always more Outward out there. If you go over to the Slate Plus feed, this week, Owen is going to stick around, help us update the old gay agenda. So if you're not already a subscriber, remember that by joining Slate Plus, you'll get ad-free podcasts, extra segments on all of our shows, and you'll never hit a paywall on the Slate site. To learn more about that, you can head over to slate.com/outwardplus. Also, please send us your feedback, your topic ideas, your questions, and so on to outwardpodcast@slate.com. Our show is produced by the very healing Palace Shaw. If you like Outward, please do subscribe in your podcast app, tell your friends about it, and do rate and review this show so others can find it. But in the meantime, stay gay, dare I say, get more transsexual, and we'll see you next time.
Running an online business is hard enough without the stress and time consumption of managing hosting. Whether managing one WordPress site or dozens, Kinsta's managed solutions offer speed, enterprise-grade security, and an intuitive dashboard. With 24/7, 365 human-only expert support, get peace of mind that your sites stay online, secure, and performing their best. Start today and get your first month free with migrations handled for you. Learn more at kinsta.com/podcast. That's KINSTA.com/podcast.